Good evening. This is Mae Brussell, February the 16th, 1979, in Carmel, California, and this is tape number 376. In Time magazine, September the 5th, 1932, you may want to copy that. I'm giving you the date of it. There's an article under the title of Germany about the elections and the political controversies going on in Germany in 1932. And it says, up and down Germany, the question flashed last week, had Adolf Hitler gone crazy? Had his nerves given way? Was he really in a straitjacket, jittering in the Bavarian asylum? No, Adolf Hitler was fishing on a river in a brook. His sister was boiling the trout. He was having a delicious supper, and Adolf Hitler was doing just fine. Then it goes on to explain that there was pressure against Adolf Hitler because of a series of political assassinations that he had been linked with Handsome Adolf in Germany. This is 1932. And the von Papen regime, the von Schleicher-Papen regime, was behind them 100% in their determination to put an end to these political assassinations. Then the article goes on under the subtitle of Gumbel, the Nazis had one victory for the week. The fascist students at Heidelberg succeeded in getting fired Professor Emil J. Gumbel, who had announced in a lecture that a turnip is better than a war memorial. One doesn't become popular, said he, by saying that a popular policy will lead to a country to catastrophe, especially if the events have been shown to be true. There's no question I'm a pacifist, said Professor Gumbel. The war made me that, and I'm an anti-fascist, and I'm in favor of the Republic. But Emil Gumbel's real crime, his real dynamite, were three books that he published between 1919 and 1922. One called 4 Years of War Lies, the other 2 Years of Political Murders, 4 Years of Political Assassinations. And in these two books, he proved that over 400 political assassinations had taken place up until 1932. And the Minister of Justice admitted that this had been true. They didn't deny that these assassinations were taking place. I turned on to Mr. Gumbel through computer and automations. Edmund Barclay has been warning about fascism in this country. And as I see our leaping, galloping fascism with the electoral process going on and with the murder of Rockefeller at this time, I want to tell you that all of this happened before exactly the way it did in Germany. And because the Germans were brought to the United States and because the Americans financed Hitler, there isn't any reason not to follow what they did before to understand the present. Computer and Automation in September 1970 talked about the books that Gumbel wrote and the murders in 1923 and from 1923 and 1932. In Germany, and he said it's important to confirm that there was a pattern of political assassinations in a number of historical situations, and these occurred from World War I until Hitler became Chancellor of the Reich, of the German Reich, in 1932. That's just after the Time magazine was written. In 1933, Hitler was the Fuhrer. The illegal military groups were a group of fanatic terrorist organizations. They supported illegal armaments after World War I. And the main thing about the murders, in addition to having the people murdered that would make political changes or change Germany, say, towards a pacifist line instead of heading us towards a Holocaust that eventually killed 80 million people and displaced about 20 million more, was the insidious role of the law courts. The political assassinations committed by members of the former imperial and secret armies put a burden of administration on the justice. The murderers had to be acquitted, and the victims always had to be shown guilty, or at least the people that doing the murders were acquitted or never tried, and they got off. And the role of the courts went all the way down from the sentencing to the prosecution to what the equivalent of the Supreme Court. The witnesses that were called were witnesses that worked for the police teams, and the judges, the police, and he lists the ways by which the courts could be altered. I mentioned this, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago on Dialogue Conspiracy, but it's been so long that I want to share it with people, new people who have been taking the tapes in the last couple of years. I don't think I have read this to you before. And I bring it out, maybe I should read it every week, because of the big changes that are taking place in this country. They've been going on since the end of World War II, just as they went on in Germany at the end of the Versailles Treaty. But they're escalating now, and I think the way the person named Howard Hughes was handled and Nelson Rockefeller was handled is symbolic of treatment of men at the very highest level who had control being knocked off, because if you know that they're being taken away, there's not much chance for the lowly working person or the minorities, the blacks or children or the aged or the mentally sick. When you can experiment and remove people with such high power, then you know how much consideration they're going to have for you. Even their own working teams over and over again have to be murdered. Last week I talked about that airplane crash in Virginia where Mr. Obershane was killed, and the Federal National Transportation Safety Board wouldn't release the name of the pilot. But there was a name in the Washington Post. The pilot was Richard Neal, 42, who died with an instructor, but it turns out that the pilot had a medical certificate that expired 3 months before the crash, that he failed to maintain adequate flying hours in the plane to be qualified by the Federal Aviation Administration. The instructor, Mr. Edlin, who was with him, was not qualified to give instrument landing on this particular plane, and they were flying a kind of an airplane for which they had 2 hours, less than 2 hours experience in that type of aircraft. And Mr. Neal, the pilot, had donated his time to Mr. Obershane. And then the Washington Post said the crash triggered a number of accounts of near disasters for candidates who find it necessary to fly around portions of Virginia to run for office. Now, see, I've noticed a large number of candidates and near deaths, and we've mentioned on other tapes that airplane crash at PSA down in San Diego, and Lieutenant Governor Dimely was supposed to be on that plane, and I linked this to the Virginia plane. Well, these are the kinds of assassinations that are important because they're never thoroughly investigated, but the man who won the seat from Mr. Obershane, as I mentioned before, was John Warner, former Secretary of the Navy, who claimed that then he won the senatorial election because he had come out for segregation in the Navy. Now, that's the kind of murders that you add up and up and up and get to this number 400 before we get the Fuhrer in. And, of course, I think that the Fuhrer is going to be Ronald Reagan, the mild-mannered, or John Connally or Mr. Haig. You have a few choices at the very highest level. But there's nothing different than what went on in Germany, and I'm going right into Rockefeller. I just have 3 more things to announce, and we'll talk about the death of Nelson Rockefeller. New West had an article, this was just before they went out of business, I guess their last issue, and it says, Evel Younger joins Lacosta's law firm. Some of you who have my tapes have 2 tapes on Evel Younger, and I said hold on to them and play them because when the Republicans win in 1980, he'll be one of the first people to get an appointment. But in the meantime, he's down with a law office in Los Angeles. He didn't win as governor of California, but never fear, Younger is too heeled into the military takeover plan, the Garden Plot, and the intelligence operation to not be useful very soon. But right now he's in a law firm of Buchholder, Niemer, Fields, and Christie, which represented Lacosta, this San Diego spa that's involved in a lawsuit magazine with Penthouse. This lawsuit has gone on for about 3 years with the allegations that Lacosta is linked to organized crime. And Mo Dalitz is one of the, if not, I think he's one of the owners of Lacosta. Mo Dalitz of organized crime came from Las Vegas down to Lacosta, and he shared his house in Vegas and was very close and friendly with Robert Mayu from the Howard Hughes organization when they were setting up the assassination teams in the United States. And of course, Robert Blakey of the House Select Committee on Assassinations was a character witness for Mo Dalitz in the Penthouse trial, defending Mo Dalitz. So it's just very natural that Evel Younger, who never prosecuted organized crime in California, and he was very easy on them. In fact, this article says after Younger took office, he ordered his investigators to take Lacosta informants off the state payroll. He had them on the state payroll, but he never did much investigation of crime the entire time that he was the governor or the district attorney in Los Angeles. And, of course, he was the one who prosecuted the Sirhan case and covered up the Mayhew Vegas Hughes connections to that. So Evelyn Younger is now at a firm that has been charged with representing organized crime members, and he's been with them. So watch him surface in the back until, as I say, a Republican is elected, and then we'll have Mr. Younger back with us. There's another article I want to share with you. I don't want to lose it. It's about a house that's being sold in Washington, D.C. This is Washington Post, February the 6th, 1979. It says CIA puts its Eastern Shore safe house mansion on sale. Now, this is about an 8-bedroom house, 8 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms that was used as a safe house when Gary Powers came home from the Soviet Union. His plane was down, and remember, he was supposed to be embarrassing the United States because it brought off the peace treaty that President Eisenhower wanted with Khrushchev, and Powers' name I've mentioned in regards to Lee Harvey Oswald and those 2 John Paisley tapes that I did several weeks ago. Well, Gary Powers didn't embarrass the United States and didn't suffer. He was taken to a 79-acre spread where they have boats in the harbor. You can come in through a boat or sailboats in placid waters, a baronial home, and so forth. This huge, it's a 7-bedroom home. It's been used by the CIA in 1962, and when Powers came home, he stayed there. There's 4,000 feet of shoreline, and there's a manor house. The CIA is selling it now. The asking price is at least $350,000, but knowing how real estate go, I think that's because the General Accounting Office handles the sale of that house. Otherwise, this kind of an estate with 79 acres and this many rooms and baths would probably be a $2 or $3 million home. And one of the things I didn't bring out on my tapes of Yuri Nosenko and John Paisley and Lee Harvey Oswald was the fact that when the House Select Committee on Assassinations said that Yuri Nosenko, the defector from the Soviet Union, was put in a house, and then they put him in a vault and built a great big house around him. I could see Yuri Nosenko at a very private estate living off the hog. He was given almost $1 million in 1968 after his, in quotes, captivity. Now, I saw Yuri Nosenko not living anything like they said he did outside of Washington, and being favored and babied because he had worked with the CIA and was a double agent in the KGB. So when this article came out this week, it said that since 1962, they haven't said what this property was used for. It was built in 1930. It has a chained entrance, and it says no trespassing, and it was used for secret purposes. It was quiet. Everything they did there was quiet. And after the Powers incident, this is from the Washington Post, the CIA never said what they did with the place. They used it for Gary Powers, but then they said they'd never be able to use it again. So the home's history after 1962 becomes shrouded in secrecy. It was used for training. Training for what? Well, that's classified, they said. Now, I would bet you a good hunk of my political research that that is the house that Yuri Nosenko has taken to, this beautiful 8-bedroom, 7-bathroom home, 79 acres, 4,000 feet of shoreline, and there's a photograph. It's in Talbot County, Maryland, on the Choptank River, and that's where Yuri Nosenko stayed after Gary Powers stayed there. I bet you Nosenko was in that house. And then in 1968, he was moved, given a new identity, and he's North Carolina. I don't believe they put him through all those tortures. I think it makes good news, and it was a diversionary. But this house hasn't been admittedly used since 62, when it was used for Gary Powers, so it would be a perfect place to use. One more article about Mr. Khomeini, an important article, not about him alone, but how he got his power. And I got this from the National Labor Caucus. There's an article, Is Khomeini Revolt a Blood Feud? And there's a story of how he came to power, but there was a sentence in here that is terribly important, because this is what it says. It says, Khomeini had not given up when he was kicked out of, in 1963, when the Shah had a referendum, what he called his White Revolution, and so forth. Khomeini counteracted in June with riots, and immediately the Shah had Khomeini arrested. The army opened fire, 10,000 people were killed, and so forth. But Khomeini, it says, had not given up. Every day he launched calls for rebellion against the Shah. Khomeini was certainly the first to use a new weapon. in the subversion war, cassettes, cassettes, thousands of cassettes containing his calls were made in Lebanon or Libya and shipped to Iran. Now, I emphasize and spell this out for you because I have a very close friend who went to Europe to live. He realized that this country was going fascist in 1970. That was about the time that I was ready to leave for Canada, and then we had the accident in the family. And I stayed back here and retrenched what we were doing here. We couldn't leave at the time. After Bonnie was killed, and Barbara was in the hospital, and I stayed home. And I have this friend who I met about that time, and then he went over to Africa, and he went to Middle East. He was in China. He went into Cuba, and he mastered a large number of languages, and he made up his mind he was going to find out what was going on in the world, and the only way he could find out was to speak the native tongue. And then he came back here in about 1974, and he had attended oil conferences in Sweden. He'd been in Paris, and he got into meetings. He could speak the languages, and he went to the meetings, and he's been a source of information to me. And I had been on KLRB since 1971, and he said, Mae, make tape cassettes and send them out over the world, because people all over have these little machines, these little boxes. You wouldn't believe it. They have nothing else. They have no cars, no televisions, no radios. They have that little transistor, that tape cassette. They're manufactured cheap over there. They're coming in from Japan. And he had been in Africa and North Africa. And he said, put your message on cassette and spread it around the world so the people will have the history and know what is happening. And I didn't do that. I was on the air until last June. Well, the tapes, the reels were available. We were mailing out the reels, and I suppose some cassettes for a while, but not on a regular basis like now. But the main thing is that we are going into a terrible period of turmoil, and people want answers, and they want to know where to get facts, and they want to be able to put these things together. And I know you people do because you subscribe. That's the first step in, that's the first part of the swimming, is to get in the water. But you have to take these cassettes that you have. There's no copyright. Copy them, send them all over. Send them to 10 people. You could buy 3 for $1. They sell cheaper at drugstores and so forth. I get the master copies here. But for you listeners, and many of you are doing this now, spread it. You don't have to tell me who receives them. I'm getting mail, and I'm answering questions from people all over the world, and I do have a distributor in London now. We sent out $100 worth of tapes to a man in Australia, and there's some in Ireland. And the main thing is get the message going by the tape cassette so it permeates the thinking of this country that there are these murders. These murders are taking place. And as we get closer to war, people will listen to you better. They'll listen to me better on the radio now than they did 3 or 4 years ago. As the inflation goes up, as the gasoline's taken away and you can't afford food or heating or education or health, and when your friends can't afford these things, they'll catch on. And if you read the newspapers, front pages just today, the Mexicans rebuke Carter's vow of respect. They, as much as said to him yesterday, how can we relate to you? You people are sleazy in your dealings, and we can't trust you, and you wouldn't deal with us with our natural gas until you found out how much oil we had. Then you come running to us like you're our long buddies. In Mexico is really telling the president off, which was that's what 77 countries should have done and never did up to this point. There's a mystery disease in Naples, 64 babies in Naples, 910 in Jonestown. There'll be mystery diseases all over the world. Americans in Iran fear serious violence unless they flee. Americans in every country are going to feel violence, and other countries are watching and taking off from there. Another headline this morning, Turkey will fall as Iran did. You bet your booties it's going to be Nicaragua, Guatemala, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Haiti. The whole world is watching Iran because the Savak and the Shah had the ultimate in power. They had the ultimate in greed. They had the ultimate in United States support. The president going over there and dancing his New Year's Eve party with the Shah a year ago this New Year's. We gave them everything they needed. And when it was time to get them out, because of the exploitation and the imperialism, the way we were grabbing their oil for our needs and keeping them at slave labor with a court that was identical to Nazi Germany and torturing machines, cutting off arms, legs, fingers, and head garroting at the collar, manufactured in the USA, training police in Washington and in Texas for all over the world. Those countries are watching. Also today, U.S. arms cost $22 billion. You can't even visualize what that figure is, and neither could I, but it's more than we need for weapons at this time, and the weapons aren't going to do any good. But now we're going to get back to Rockefeller, because all of this is brewing and taking place now, and because I'm convinced Nelson Rockefeller was murdered. I want to go into as much as we have time for, because he was another of the big cookies. He was the biggest one, and people always feared the Rockefeller family. I said, no, it's the Reagan machine that has the power, the Reagan-Conley machine, the Haigs that have the power. It's not the Nelson Rockefellers. And the truth is, now one sister is dead, another two brothers are dead, Nelson is dead, there's just Lawrence and David left. And because of this scandal and all the blackmailing, they're going to have to sit very close to their banking desk, and they're not going to be the wheelers and dealers that they used to be. Well, they'll still continue the best they can, but it'll never be the same again. Now, the given facts on the Rockefeller murder, I'm just going to run off very quickly, and I'm going to spend all the rest of the time on questions that should be answered for grand jury or police, and show you the comparisons between here and Chappaquiddick in Germany. Nelson Rockefeller, as I say, was a political figure. He was controversial, and the lies began the moment he died. And that's what I want to go into, because Hugh Murrow, his press secretary, worked for him 35 years. So I don't think that he was a plant from the Defense Department or the CIA, such as Megan Marshak, who only worked 4 years. But he worked 35 years, and he lied from the very beginning. So they had something on Rockefeller, and they had something on what Shanna Pierce and Megan were doing, what Rockefeller was doing with that house at 25 West 54th Street, that forced Mr. Murrow to lie and break this thing right from the beginning off on the wrong course. It's like trying to, make a poached egg, and you break the shell and drop it on the floor. You can't put it together again. And the Rockefeller story obviously was not meant to be put together again. Hugh Murrow met outside the hospital and told us that Rockefeller died at Rockefeller Center. And that's where the trouble started. And then he went to the apartment of Megan Marshak at 25 West 54th Street, and he was there at 4 a.m. in the morning when Associated Press had called her for part of the story. So the cover-up was then, and the lies started. The lie of where he was, the lie first that he was with his chauffeur, and that was wrong. He was with then the chauffeur and the security guard. Then that was wrong. They said he wasn't at the townhouse. He was at the townhouse. He wasn't at Rockefeller Center. Another lie. Then they said he wasn't with the chauffeur, but he was with a guard and a special aide that he works with. Then that was wrong. He wasn't with the guard. He was only with the aide. The aide was a 31-year-old woman. Then that was wrong. She wasn't 31. She was 21. And then she wasn't 21. She was 25. Then they said an unidentified woman called the ambulance. That was wrong. Then they said it wasn't an unidentified woman. It was his aide, Megan Marshak. Then that was wrong. Then they said it wasn't Megan. It was Poinsettia Pierce that called the emergency. And then they said he died at 11:15, and that was wrong. He died at 10:15. Then Poinsettia came in and said he died at 10. She got a call at 10:50 to come down, and he died at 11:15, and that was wrong. And then they came back and said he died at 10:15, and that there was an hour elapse. You can add that many lies up in that many days if you followed it consecutively. He owned the apartment, where the cooperative apartment, or the main building it was, on 25 West 54th Street that Megan Marshak lived. She lived just several doors down from where his place was on 13 West 54th Street. He gave her $45,000 to buy the apartment. Mrs. Rockefeller, as a co-owner of the building, approved of her moving in there into that building. She made $60,000 a year. She had unlimited expense account. She, in quotes, helped write Rockefeller's speeches. She worked on his book. She arranged dinner parties. She's described in one article as the jack of all trades. And also she was on duty 24 hours a day. A chauffeur drove Rocky to his apartment with a aide named Andrew Hoffman. The chauffeur went around the corner and parked on 55th Street. The doorman knew where to get him. But at that point, Andrew Hoffman disappears or goes in with Rocky. That is what we'll never know. That's one of the questions that is primary to this case. Where did Andrew Hoffman go? Because when Porchetta Pierce came down and got a call from Megan, Rocky had a heart attack. Megan was alone with Rocky. But when the ambulance arrived, not when the police came in, when the two policemen came in, at 11:16, 11:17, Megan was alone with Rocky. But when the ambulance came in, at 11:22, Andrew Hoffman came into Rocky's house there, the aide. So there's a missing time period from 9 to 11:17. And if Megan Marshak hired the staff, there's an article that she hired that staff for him. Did she hire Hoffman? And the point is, was he in the building hiding somewhere? It was 5 floors, and Rockefeller could have said, go on upstairs. Was he out on the streets? Was he with Porchetta 2 doors down? He was holding a walkie-talkie microphone and telling the ambulance drivers to go to Lenox Hill Hospital, which was 22 blocks away. And they said, no, we have to go to Roosevelt Hospital, which is over here on 51st Street and 8th, which is 4 blocks away. We go to the nearest hospital. And Andrew Hoffman says, but you don't know who this is. This is Nelson Rockefeller. And they went 22 blocks instead. But when the ambulance drivers came in, they both said that they saw a man out on the street with a walkie-talkie. And they knew it was important, that something was going on, that he had a walkie-talkie and was talking to someone, and they didn't know who he was. But then they identified Andrew Hoffman inside with a walkie-talkie. So whether it was that man with disguise or a hat or glasses they didn't recognize, who then came in and ordered the body to the Lenox Hill Hospital, because that's the important connecting link right there. Where was Andrew Hoffman? Now, there's a series of possibilities that I have listed, that either he was in the house, there are 5 stories there, and he could possibly have helped kill Nelson Rockefeller. He could have, I am not charging with murder. I'm saying the grand jury should investigate the possibility, because the possibilities are, A, that Nelson Rockefeller was injected and died, similar to a Jonestown cyanide. If there's a hole in his arm, you never saw it, because Dr. Esakof was at the hospital. He had been phoned, and nobody knows who phoned him. We brought that up last week, and I talked about Andrew Hoffman last week. He could be injected and taken. Was Hoffman in the house? There are 5th floors. Megan hired the staff. Was he over at Megan's apartment with Porchetta Pierce? Or was he out on the streets till Porchetta got word? Once Megan called Porchetta and said, come on over here. Once Porchetta goes out on the street from the number 25 to the number 13, then somebody on the street would know he's had it. The name Andrew Hoffman is important because it has not yet been resolved where he was. We know he talked to the medical aides and told them where to send the body, but that's all we know. Regarding the politics, those are a few of the given facts, and I have a lot more. We could do about 10 or 12 tapes for what I've typed up already this past week, about 80 pages, but we'll do the best we can. An article by Joseph Kraft, syndicated columnist, February the 12th, 1979, titled The Private Lives of Public Men, Scandals Show in the 1980 Campaign. And, of course, they're quick now with the articles, and it reminds us that there's scandals in both parties, that Rockefeller couldn't run when he had his divorce in 1964. He lost to Goldwater because of his divorce. And in 1972, there was Chappaquiddick, so Ted Kennedy couldn't get the nomination in 72. And that Gerald Ford probably can't get it in 1980 because his wife takes drugs, is an alcoholic, and it would be like desertion if he left her. And with Carter, he has problems with Brother Billy, and Burt Lance, he has his problems. And then he concludes, that leaves us with Governor Ronald Reagan. What little I've seen of him suggests a picture book life, wholesome and easy, like an old movie. I'm glad Joseph Kraft clarified it with what little I've seen of him, because if he lived here and knew what he did as governor, that would be a different story. Maybe he doesn't want to know those facts. But already the editorials are coming out, and it looks like Reagan is escalating his campaign. There is a big article about opening up offices. He's on the radio at 280 stations. He's in 110 newspapers with columns. And on January 31st, immediately after Rockefeller was dead, Ronald Reagan began his campaign. Reagan steps up his campaign for 1980, and within 3 weeks the campaign will be rolling. And his first affair, one big affair, will be in New York City with his support by Mr. Rabb, a New York lawyer, a cabinet member under Ike, who's going to have an affair and bring Reagan in contact with the Republicans in New York City. And he's recruiting for his power base all of the Republicans that had voted for Gerald Ford. So that is the politics of assassination. And now he can come into New York City as king of New York, the king of the Republicans, because Rocky is no longer a factor. We'll do more of this on side 2 of this tape on Rocky. This is Mae Brussell, and it's side 2, February 16th, 1979, and it's tape number 376. I want to ask questions on this side about Rockefeller and some major decisions that were made in a political nature, the politics of the murders of these people, and that's why I went in at length about Mr. Gumbel and what he observed in Germany. Dr. Michael Baden is the chief medical examiner of New York City. And Dr. Baden is also the man who represented the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the medical team. There was a large medical team, and he spoke and testified for them. And he was handpicked by G. Robert Blakey, who worked again with Mo Dalitz as a character witness in the La Costa case, and he represented or spoke up for him in the charges of organized crime, the links to organized crime. I've gone into that. We've done other tapes on that matter. But Dr. Michael Baden is now chief medical examiner in New York City. And with that power of working with the CIA and with people who have links to organized crime, such as G. Robert Blakey, and important justice positions, just as in Nazi Germany, covering up the murder of the President of the United States, that alone would tell you where Mr. G. Robert Blakey is and Dr. Michael Baden. He has the decision in New York whether to do autopsies and gives the approval for cremations. But it's very interesting. Dr. Michael Baden, the chief medical examiner of New York City, was in San Diego, just where La Costa is, and the same power base that Evel Younger has that I talked about earlier with La Costa down there. I don't have any link that Dr. Michael Baden was at La Costa in San Diego that weekend. I don't know what he was doing. I know at the time that John Kennedy was killed, Clay Shaw from New Orleans was in San Francisco, and when Jim Garrison arrested him a few years later as part of the conspiracy, he said, well, I was off in San Francisco, and they checked it out, and he had arranged to be there on that day and have a luncheon as part of his international trademark work. And I think it is in the realm of these huge conspiracies, which always send these people to the funniest places. Baden wasn't skiing in Colorado or up in Montana or hiking somewhere. He was down, whatever he was doing, he was in San Diego when Nelson Rockefeller, the former vice president, and the governor of that state for 4 different terms, was killed. And over the telephone, he talked to Dr. Ernest Esakof. And Dr. Esakof was the man who ordered the cremation of the body, or said that the family gave him the circumstances to cremate. Esakof responded as in terms of the autopsy and the cremation, and he said that he checked with the family and that they refused the autopsy. And what Esakof said is that the Rockefellers have the absolute right. We have no right to order it. We're not busybodies, Esakof said. Families have rights too. And with that, the service was supposed to be on Monday, and then he was quickly cremated, noted by all the news, on Sunday. Now, I just want to ask this question because this is a question which I'm sure came up in Germany. And if I don't run through the 1,000 questions I want to ask you, and I just stay with 4, maybe I should go slower and ask these questions. Does a family have the right to say no autopsy or yes, cremate, if there are circumstances where murder could have been involved? If Rockefeller had no history of heart condition, if he'd only been to a doctor 3 times in 20 years, if he was at the school that afternoon having a jolly good time, and I saw him and taped a show on Phil Donahue a couple of weeks ago where he looked like he had 30 more years to go, like he said he'd lived to be 100, like his grandfather. When he's political, when you've had 400 political assassinations in Germany, when we're having an election in 1980, and he was controversial, he was a thorn in the side of the Republicans. They'd be damn glad to not have him around when they meet in Detroit the next time. In the same Detroit where the Ford Motor Company came that financed and created not only the story of the Elders of Prodigals of Zion and the anti-Semitism around the world, the modern anti-Semitism, but financed Hitler right down to the last bottom dollar. That's the Detroit, Michigan, where the next Republican conventions will be. But let's not digress. Dr. Esakof said that the family, when they refuse it, we're not busybodies. Now, if somebody dies of a heart attack and is not attended by a doctor, such as Adlai Stevenson or J. Edgar Hoover or William Harvey or Sheffield Edwards, and I can list on, the ones that weren't shot through the mouth or through the head that died of these heart attacks, when the intelligence community said they had the substances that they could just put a drop on your coat and it goes through your clothing and you die of a heart attack, it gets into the bloodstreams, or you open up a lighter and run away and there's a poison that comes out and you die of a heart attack. When you have a man with no history of heart disease and one after the other continuous deaths and murders that only serve one side, and that is extreme right wing, the proportion of people having major heart attacks from the leaders of the Republican Party that works with the defense agencies, the Defense Industrial Security Command or the Defense Intelligence Agency. They're very small. I don't know where these people are. So Dr. Esakof gives the remark that we have a right to let the family make decisions. He says that's their absolute right, and I challenge that, and I think you should challenge that. And I think you should ask your friends, if families have the right to know when to cremate and when to have autopsies, when they're public officials and they're not under the care of a physician. Now, New York Governor Carey took this position. He says, I'm going to take an official hands-off attitude to this case. Carey was asked why there was no medical help for the former vice president for 1 hour. And remember, the recipients and the liars are inheriting a lot of money. Megan Marshak inherited $45,000 clear on that apartment, and Mr. Murrow got $30,000. These people that lied and covered up also inherited a lot of money. But Governor Carey said it is serious, but it isn't necessarily criminal negligence. It's a family matter. I know of nothing requiring an investigation. I'm not the mayor nor the district attorney. And then the New York Post had an article, 2 mystery women in Rocky's death. Why is there a mystery? And then it says a crew of curtain of secrecy. There's it drew a curtain of secrecy around them. There's mystery, there's secrecy, there's a walkie-talkie, the Father's Hospital, an early cremation, a series of 12 or 14 major lies about what happened. But getting back to the governor of the state, it isn't criminal negligence, it's a family matter. Now, if that precedence takes over, that's like there's a family in Maryland, CIA woman, whose one younger son killed the younger brother and buried him in the backyard, and he was acquitted. He'll make a good agent years from now. Rumors of other public officials, one in particular, who killed his father. Maybe you know who I'm thinking of. Earl Warren in Bakersfield. He'll make a good head of the CIA someday, this boy in Maryland right now. But now I don't want to digress too far. The point being that I don't think it's a family matter when these discrepancies take place. We have a right to know whether the candidates that are selected for us in any year, 1964, 68, 72, 76, 80, on, are done because somebody was murdered. I call that the murder, the bullets, or blackmail syndrome. In this case, it's the blackmail, because what they have on Rockefeller and that house over there will keep them quiet. Now, in all of these assassination cases that are direct murders, I was told by a man, I think I had on KLRB a couple of years ago, who called me one night that he had murdered 10 people for the CIA, and the chain of command, if you don't have that tape, or if I don't have it on a tape, remind me and I'll do it for you later, but it begins with a decision in Washington on who to kill. Defense Department, agencies, Pentagon, national security agencies, whatever. Whichever agency has the ultimate power, which I believe in terms of national security is the Defense Department, and then to the CIA, the National Security Council. And it begins by having a phone call to a house, or a house of prostitution, or a house where women live. These women occupy this house, and a man phones that house out of the city. The one that he mentioned was that the instruction first went to Salt Lake City, then went to a house in Chicago. But I'm sure they have them all over the country. And then the women give an instruction, a woman that he asked for, like Mary gives an instruction, and then he tells him through code what city, and then he goes to either the airport or the Greyhound box, and in that locker, general delivery, he picks up a letter, and it has a key number, and through a code he knows which location the key opens, and then there's a book on the person he's to kill with all their characteristics and when they come and go and what they do, and their personal habits. Well, here is Rocky coming at 9 o'clock at night from his home. He's had dinner with his wife and 2 sons and spent the day with them. So I guess they're saturated as a family, and he decides to work on his art book, and he gets over there at 9 o'clock, and about 9:05, he calls Megan and says, come on down. Now, I asked the question about Rockefeller. Did he know too much? I listed some motives on the other tapes, and I'm wondering if the motive for covering this whole thing up is, could that location, that co-op next door, be a front for the Central Intelligence Agency or the Defense Department that Rockefeller used for defense? And that's why they have to cover this from the top down. The district attorney, the governor, the mayor. As a matter of fact, I want you to look at the articles coming over on this story. I outlined all of them that have come out in the last 3 weeks. And I noticed a predominance of Associated Press articles or directly from the Examiner reporter in Washington or the New York Times or the New York Post. I haven't seen any UPI stories on Rockefeller, United Press International. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just wondering. And in California, there is nothing in the papers. There's one little article maybe every 4 or 5 days, because don't forget, this is Reagan country. This is the area. Megan Marshak worked in Van Nuys. She's from Encino, California. Dr. Bond was down in San Diego. Ronald Reagan's base is California. And the California papers aren't having anything about the Rockefeller death. Just enough to let you know that it's a girly show. And that's all. And there's 2 possibilities, or they blend together. That house that they call a cooperative that Rocky had, was this used for the CIA? You see, Rockefeller had large offices at Rockefeller Center on the 54th floor. It was on Rockefeller Center. And that has elevator security guards, and he's very protected when he goes there. And there's no reason he can't do his work there. Then he has an office on 54th Street that he used when he was a governor. And around the corner, on 55th Street, and around the corner on 54th Street, he has another office which connects back to back. But he's not doing anything now in public office, so the governor office could be used for the art collection. But there's an entryway from 55th to 54th, so if a chauffeur leaves somebody off to see the governor on 55th Street, he could be up in paradise over on 54th Street at this little cooperative where these women are. And was this a place that entertained public officials? Megan Marshak, was the hostess at a party when 28 ambassadors were there at his estate. And the question is, was this a CIA safe house that went on all along for national security reasons, which was rented under the name of Rockefeller, that one apartment 2 doors down? Or was it where he personally fixed up ambassadors and people that visited New York City, business contracts? That's how Howard Hughes got his contracts, fixing up all the military with various women. And then he had them, he not only blackmailed them, but he could seduce them and get these huge contracts. That is public record with his PR man, Johnny Meyer, how he started his making the weapons contracts and becoming a billionaire in that field, in addition to the oil tool bit. But this house had some purpose. Why did Rocky buy that cooperative? As I say, he has one piece on 54th, one on 55th, and then he has the controlling interest of who buys in, and his wife passes who goes in. And I think we have to ask more about those offices. And then Megan Marshak was supposed to have hired the staff for him on 54th Street. Think how convenient. 2 places, 2 5-story houses. I mean, that's 10 floors back to back with secret entrance, and then a place 2 doors down besides. A lot more had to go on in those 3 buildings that we can ever imagine. And it had to be, I think, government related. I think it had to be what they call national security. I think it had to do with visiting dignitaries. Megan was on 24-hour call. Rocky wasn't available that much, 24-hour call, with a wife and 2 teenage kids. Did she go to the airport to meet people? Did she fix them up? I'm asking the question. I don't know. We have to ask these questions. Did she take them to the theater, to dinner, and then they got fixed up later? What was that house used for? What were the 3 houses used for? He had an apartment on 62nd Street and 5th Avenue. That's where Rockefeller's other house is, and then he had other houses in the country, a Japanese house and his large house on the estate, and he had 2 in Washington. And all the time these things are going on. And that's, even for a Rockefeller, that's a lot of expensive property and staff, unless they weren't really the staff. And again, as I put on the Paisley tapes, if some of you don't have those, you can get them on John Paisley, the missing CIA man. His wife, Mary Ann Paisley, took orders from Catherine Hart from the CIA, another woman. And as soon as Megan was with Rockefeller and Rocky was dead, she picks up the phone and calls Panchita. Was that to tell Panchita that she had done her job? Was she to check in that it was completed, that she should come down now that he's dead? Because when she came down and she was asked, was Rockefeller dead? This is Panchita Pierce, that a television woman who would have poise, would have know-how or clout, acting training, and so forth. When they asked her, was Rockefeller dead? When you came there, she said, I don't know. Was he dead or alive? She said, I don't know. What did she do? She simply left her apartment, where she said she put on her clothing at 10:50 on a Saturday night, came down, picked up a phone, 911, called the emergency, and walked out. She didn't say, is he dead or alive? She says she didn't know. And she was under the pay of Rockefeller at one time, and she was Megan Marshak's best friend, and leaves her alone with a man who is A, either dying, or B, dead, and walks out to her apartment and goes back upstairs. Now, that is impossible. That is a total impossible arrangement unless they worked for the Defense Department and they had been on the control of Rockefeller, Megan, for 4 years, because she was his secretary when he was head of the Rockefeller Committee to investigate the assassinations of foreign leaders. She helped write his speeches. Did she write the press reports for the news on the Rockefeller Committee? What was her role with the media? This is a woman who worked with the Associated Press 6 months and then goes to the Vice President of the United States at a time when he's investigating illegal CIA activities. And think of that, because at the time of Watergate, when Richard Nixon, as the President of the United States, was himself being illegally bugged all the time. I mean, some of the machines he knew that were going, but his information on his desk was stolen by a Yeoman Redford and taken to Admiral Moore, who was Secretary of the Navy, and Nixon had to reappoint him as Secretary of the Navy. And there was a window drop of paint that a bird put there that the CIA had that plants these listening devices. The President of the United States was under surveillance all the time. He was President of the United States until Watergate, when they shoot him out and made ready for the next stage. And in came General Haig temporarily, and Rockefeller and Ford. But Ford was on the Warren Commission, and he became the vice president. Then under him, he had Nelson Rockefeller. And Nelson Rockefeller was investigating, in quotes, investigating the Kennedy assassination and the other assassinations just superficially, when he had David Bellin, his head attorney, who was the attorney for the Warren Commission, working for the Rockefeller Committee, a woman from California, 21 years old. 21 years old. Think of Terry Buford, working for Jim Jones, who knows all about the drugs, the murders, the $26 million, and they send this little innocent chick to London to open up bank accounts in Switzerland and France and Panama and Bahamas, 14 banks in $26 million. And this little, looks like a little hippie, a little Manson family member, you know, a kid off Haight-Ashbury, and nothing. And out comes Megan Marshak from California, from Encina. What radio training did she have? Where did she learn her newspaper work? What college did she go to? Where did she graduate from? What was her experience before the Associated Press hired her? Do you know how hard it would be at the time that Watergate is coming down and the President of the United States is out and Agnew has been kicked out and Income Ford and Vice President Rockefeller? Do you know how hard it would be to get a job during those years, 4 years ago, or any time today, or any time for Associated Press? It was Gerald Ford at the Warren Commission in January 21st meeting in 1964 when the subject came up, how are we going to handle the newspaper reports of what we're investigating? And Gerald Ford said, well, gentlemen, I can handle the AP and the UPI, the Associated Press and the United Press International. And as soon as he said that, and they had trouble with some people, they mentioned Joe Jostin and Thomas Buchanan and Mark Lane, they said, well, let's just call in the Associated Press and the United Press and say, what do you have? And get them. The Warren Commission was to call them in, and they would continue the covering up. So the Associated Press, I can handle the AP. Do they have chicks that handle this? Was Marshak a plant for 4 years, such as Mary Jo Kopechne? At the time she was inside the Ted Kennedy camp and Robert Kennedy, they called her the boiler room girls. But she worked for George Smathers, as I've said before on tapes, and Phoebe Rebozo's pal and Nixon's pal. And she was at that party partying, only this time she died. In this particular case, Megan lived. But I think even just the question, if we have to use the whole side of this tape, what was that house used for? Government operations, were they caught in one of their government operations was one of their government agents. And for that reason, they have to cover up this whole thing. They get rid of Rocky, but they get him in a way that he can't be exposed, because not only was he with the chick who was in various types of gowns, whichever one you want to choose, but the house and the unnatural way with which a newspaper woman calls another woman and says, come on down, he's had a heart attack. She said, the governor's had a heart attack. She identified him by name, Governor Rockefeller, or the Vice President Rockefeller. She said he had a heart attack. She named the condition, and she calls her friend, who gets dressed, and she says, call the chauffeur and tell him. And Mr. Chauffeur is parked around the corner on 55th. Why would Megan Marshak say, notify the chauffeur? Did she hire that staff too? Were they under her employee? The chauffeur didn't appear on the scene. He wasn't there when the police came. He wasn't there when the ambulance was there. He hasn't been seen since that time. He showed up at the hospital later. But who did he carry to the hospital? Was it Dr. Esakof? Were the women the ones that called Esakof? We don't know. What time did they call him? Did they call him at 10:15 when Megan called Ponchetta Pierce? Did the chauffeur then call Esakof, or Ponchetta call Esakof? Ponchetta gets dressed and comes down, and she's told Nelson Rockefeller had a heart attack. Call the chauffeur. But we don't know why the chauffeur. All Megan had to do as a newswoman who wrote his speeches, who worked for the Associated Press, who worked for the Vice President of the United States, she knew his name, she knew his condition. All she had to do was pick up a phone. 911. Governor Rockefeller's had a heart attack. She hired the staff. She owned a part of the building next door. Give the address. They were there in 2 minutes. But they had to wait till Ponchetta Pierce did it. And these are the threads, these cast of characters. Andrew Hoffman, Mr. Esakof, Dr. Ernest Esakof, and the driver, the chauffeur. The chauffeur's name is Lonnie Wiltshire, but we haven't seen him at all. They've all taken a powder like the Chappaquiddick women. They just were flown off the island, and never seen again, and that was it. And where did they go? Where are these people? That hasn't been answered. And why call Ponchetta to get the chauffeur when he never was seen on the premise again? And why not call the 911? Now, the press aide, Hugh Murrow, as I say, covered at the very top. But the police in New York City, a few honest policemen, just like there are a few honest policemen in Germany that revealed about political assassinations that Mr. Gumbel wrote about, they played back the police tape of Megan Marshak calling for aid. They kept that recording. And you see, this is the age of cassettes and recorders. Otherwise, Ponchetta Pierce's name would never have come into this murder. It would have been just that Megan was there and he had a heart attack. But they played back the recording and they heard the woman say, "Megan, what's the address?" And then they had to admit that a woman came down, was notified, saw the body, and left. And she hasn't been interviewed since. And the police picked up another lie. They asked Mr. Hugh Murrow, the press aide, about Rockefeller, whether there was a woman present, and he said he didn't know of any woman being there. But he was with Megan Marshak from the time of the hospital when Rocky was dead. At 4 in the morning, he was at her place making their cover stories, but they were lying straight through. And I think the only rationale for the lying, as I say, is that that was a CIA safe house, not only for Rockefeller's personal appointments for oil companies, but it had to be a Defense Department safe house, and that Rocky used it for national security reasons or for foreign dignitaries. He went into that house, he was there frequently, and it was filled with his art objects. And we don't have to guess what kind of a house it was. It didn't have filing cabinets like this house for research. I'm sure that her apartment wasn't filled with the research. But the point is that he did visit over there. But the reason the governor, district attorney, the doctors, the chief medical advisor, and so forth had to cover up, because the mystery of what went on in those 3 houses and the staff will answer the question of who ordered the murder of Nelson Rockefeller. And incidentally, if Dr. Michael Baden was in San Diego, I think it's another more interesting story about Dr. Esakof, Ernest Esakof, because that name made me wonder whether he's Russian or German. And Dr. Esakof's from South Africa. He graduated from medical school in Johannesburg in 1952. And he's on the staff of Memorial Hospital and Lenox Hill Hospital. And this is Esakof who phoned Michael Baden on the telephone when Baden was not even diagnosing. Nobody suggested pumping his stomach, although the police paramedics said that he had had wine on the table, that he had had wine that night, because evidently he had vomited and it was on the couch, but nobody pumped his stomach or checked him for poison. And the doctor who was there, who it seems wasn't his doctor, who said he had a heart condition which justified the early cremation, was not his regular doctor. He came from South Africa, from Johannesburg, to New York City, where he had the important decision to agree to cremate Nelson Rockefeller, a very important man in the United States, and certainly from the time Dr. Esakof graduated in 1952. Pardon me, I had to sneeze. From the time he graduated in 1952 in Johannesburg, and then came to the United States, it'd be interesting to know how he worked his way from a hospital in Johannesburg to a Lenox Hill Hospital, where someday he's the recipient of the remains of Nelson Rockefeller, and immediately sends it to a mortuary in Westchester County that same night, and then it's cremated on Sunday the next day. Remember how Mr. Paisley was cremated, the CIA man, and we've gone into these early cremations of controversial people like Lee Harvey Oswald and John Paisley recently and Jim Jones. Interesting how quickly Rocky was cremated. A doctor from Johannesburg, South Africa, who's at a hospital where Andrew Hoffman on walkie-talkie is saying, send him there, 22 blocks away. He's sent to Westchester County, where CIA has, we have a right to know if they have an undertaker up there or handle CIA bodies specifically, like they did with John Paisley's body in Maryland. And then he's cremated a day early. Why a day early? Did somebody want to see the arm? Was there a hole in the sleeve, a needle, like there was in Marilyn Monroe's arm at the time of her autopsy? She wasn't cremated, and there was an autopsy there, and there was a needle mark in her arm.
on the politics of women and assassinations, Max Lerner had an article January 31st, right after Rocky was dead, saying that when great men die, we have the right to know all the circumstances. The historian wants the exact details. Of course, he says that, but he doesn't care who killed John Kennedy or Robert or Martin Luther King. But he goes on to say that after Roosevelt died, Franklin Roosevelt died, it took years to find out who was with him, and it was Lucy Mercer, a woman that he had had a love affair with when he was Secretary of the Navy. And he said this was held up for a long time. But there's a new book out now called Dulles by Leonard Mosley, put out by Dial Press. And on page 179, there's an Operation Sunrise, and it tells about Alan Dulles working over in Germany with the top German generals. He was working in Italy and Switzerland, and he was working with top German officials to get them to defect and come to the United States side, called an end of the war, before Russia, I guess, came all the way to the west and met us halfway. Alan Dulles was making secret dealings with these Germans and Italians from the Allied headquarters, and the United States thought it would be a good idea. And the Soviet Union caught on, and they sent a message to Franklin Roosevelt that, what are you doing? You're betraying us. You weren't going to make secret deals. And Roosevelt sent a message to Moscow, April the 12th, 1975. That was his last communication to Stalin. And he said that he would not go along with this deal, that he would never appease Moscow. And that went out April the 12th, 1945, and Roosevelt was dead that night. One of the reasons for the secrecy and circumstances surrounding Roosevelt's death was always that his Warm Springs, Georgia, with his companion, Lucy Mercer. At that age and that health, I don't think it could have been much of a scandal that he was with Lucy, but because he was with a woman companion, the real story of how Roosevelt died might have been suppressed. I understand that Fala was never seen after that, and there was even a talk that coffin was never opened, that there was suggested that he was murdered or blown up, and that was hushed up. And the reason it was hushed up was because of a woman. And now we look back and study history, and it could have been because he was not going to betray Moscow. The tape has run out again, too fast, I'm sorry, and we'll have to wait till next week. I'll do it next week and more on Rocky.